Gentlemen, as if there are ever any bad days to be in the garage with your SV650 here, today may be the second best day of the year. And you know why that is? You know why that is? It's because we've got new tires. Oh yeah! Seriously guys, tires are the most important part of your vehicle. They're the only part of it that touches the road, and they make a huge difference in terms of performance and safety. So on the day that we replace new tires, I'm excited, one, because it's one of my favorite jobs to do, but also just because you're gonna have new tires and food's gonna taste better. The reason we're doing this specifically today is that the previous owner of my SV650 here neglected the tires. What we're going to replace them with is these Bridgestone Roadsmart 3s in the stock size. On the SV650, that's a 120/60/17 in the front and a 160/60/17 in the rear. So, let me get on with getting the bike up on the stands, and we'll get after this. Before we can get the wheel out so we can replace the tire, we need to remove and support these brake calipers. So we remove this little bolt holding the brake hose on there. We liberate that. And now we can do these two holding the caliper itself on. And as long as you don't squeeze the brakes, there shouldn't be anything else particularly special you need to do to get these off. We do the other side here. Get that out of the way. The axle is held in with two fasteners. There's this safety bolt that locks the axle in place, and then the axle itself, which is a huge bolt that runs all the way through the center of the wheel. So before we can loosen this, we have to remove this safety bolt. On some designs, you gotta remove this bolt completely because there's a little notch or something that it interferes with in the axle. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And then we get our 17mm to break the axle itself loose. With the axle loosened so that you can turn it by hand, just a matter of turning it until it's out of the threaded portion of the opposite side, pulling it out, making sure you support the wheel, and there we go. Our wheel is free. Wheel with the tire still on it, supported on these pieces of wood to keep the brake rotor from touching the floor. And our next order of business is to remove this valve stem so that we can let the air out, and then we can use tire irons to pry the old tire off of the rim. All right, and there we go. Once you get one spot off of the inner rim, the rest of it comes off pretty easy. So now we flip it over. We do the process again on the other side. Now that we've got our beads broken loose from the rim, we need to slip them back over the rim so that we can get the tire off of the wheel. And this is one of these places where having these rim savers comes in handy. Now, we're done with our bead breaking end of the tire. It's this end. So we use the spoon end. Grab another bite. Victory is almost ours now. Now that we've got a section like this, it's pretty big over the edge of the rim, the rest of this should go pretty easy. So with one bead off, these guys right here, we've got our tire loose on the rim, but still captive. Victory is ours. So now we can toss our old tire aside to be ready for our new tire. Now that we've got our old tire off, let's unpack our new ones here. See what... Right, there we go. So this one is the rear. We don't need that. All right, before we get these back on the rims, we want to take a minute to note a couple of things. One is this paint mark, which represents the spot on the tire that we want to line up with the valve stem to aid in balancing. And two, motorcycle tires are directional. They're meant to spin one direction. In this case, this one is meant to spin this way, as noted by this arrow here. So when we install this on the rim, we want to make sure that we get this flipped around correctly so that when we put it on the bike, it'll be spinning, where's our arrow? This right there, so that it'll be spinning this direction. We may remember that this side is the side with the speedo drive, and that means that the wheel, when it's mounted on the bike, that the speedo drive is on the left. So this is the left side of the wheel, and that means it'll spin in this direction. We want to make sure that our arrows point that way, and our arrow here points in this direction. So it goes on like this. And we also want to make sure that we get our paint dot lined up with our valve stem, which is here. So it needs to go on like this. In some cases, you can do this without tools. Getting this first bead over, you just use your weight. But I frankly am not hugely confident that that's going to be the case, but we're going to give it a shot. And we want to lubricate the side that we're going to put on first. So that's this side. So you stick it in here like this, you get your Windex, and you go around it like that. But so we lubricate that, and then we put our tire as far over the rim as we can get it. And I have a feeling this isn't going to work just by placing it over the rim. Maybe if you're fatter than me, it works. But I don't think I am fat enough. Something tells me we're going to need the tire irons for this. So we go in here with our tire irons. We may want to get our rim savers. And much like the procedure for removing this, you just use them to pry the bead. There. So then we line it up like this. And now we're in for the fight of our lives. This is by far the most difficult part of the operation. So we get our rim protector things about like that. We go in here with one tire iron. There we go. Slide our rim protectors around this way. The first half or so of it goes pretty easy. As you get closer to the end, it gets a little easier. You don't have to stretch it quite as far to get your bite. So you get it about like this. Sometimes you can do this last section in one shot. There we go. With our tire finally over the beads, or over the rim, we can now proceed to set the beads on the rim. So there's kind of a shoulder inside here that the inner edge of the tire has to seat up against in order to seal. And so we have to fill the tire with air and get it to force itself onto the bead, or onto the rim, in order to make that happen. The way we do that is we fill the tire with air through the valve stem. Now in the past, I've had okay luck simply filling one of these with air and having it just go home on its own. So that's what we're going to try first. And if that doesn't work, then we'll resort to other means. But by far the simplest answer to this is to just put some air in it until it goes home. So we're going to try that first. It would help if I put the valve core back in. Okay, got our valve core in. Alright, so there's one bead seated. Let's check the other side over here. Not quite. See that? That could have been nasty. Anyway, there we go. So now as it should be obvious, you want to keep your hands clear of where the bead's going to go when it seats, since the potential to get your fingers caught in there exists, and obviously that would suck. So, yeah. Here's our front tire ready to go back on the bike now. As long as your bearings aren't trashed, I find it's perfectly workable to simply balance the wheel on the bike before you reinstall the brakes. So that's the way I'm going to do this. In the comments, you're welcome to tell me I'm an idiot for doing this, but when I've done this in the past, it worked just fine. So that's what I'm going to do. So we get our wheel and tire back in here. Then you stick your axle through there. And now we can tighten the axle down, not all the way, just enough that the wheel is held securely in the forks. Alright, so basically I've tightened this with a socket and just my hand until it stops. I'm going to back it off just like a third of a turn. What that gets us is the wheel is supported on the axle and the bearings, but it's not so tight that the bearings are loaded. And as we can see here, the wheel spins freely. Give it a turn and you wait till it stops. It should stop. If you let go of it, you'll see that it's still turning. It stops with about right here at the bottom. The valve stem over here, maybe you can see the paint dot. So that means we need to put our wheel weights right here at the top. See that? It's still moving just a little bit. But where we want is about right here. So we're going to clean that area. We get a little bit of dirt off of there, but see, it returns to that same spot every time. So now we take our weights. We get a little string of them out here. You may want to use a knife and cut them. Or the blue stuff is just a protectant, and they've got this rubbery adhesive stuff, like double stick tape, on the bottom that's quite robust. We'll go ahead and we'll cut a couple of them here. We'll start with 2. We'll stick them right up against our center ridge. And now, let's turn the wheel, and it stays. Turn the wheel this way, still moves. Turn it this way, still moves just a little. But not much. So what we're going to do is we're going to put one more weight on the opposite side over here and call this good. So I've got one more over here on this side you can't see. But now, if we move our wheel, it stays. It still moves that way just a little bit. What if we put it here? Stays there. Stays there. Let me turn this around where you can see it. Got my weights here. I take a little piece of duct tape. If I had silver, I'd use silver, but I don't. I've got black. So I'm using black. Take a piece of duct tape, and we just put it over them, cover them up, and act as a backup just to help keep them on there. A few years ago, I would have been as shocked as you that this was an effective way of doing this. And frankly, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe you. But I've now done this on a few bikes, and this just works so well. Stick the weights on there, cover them with duct tape, bada bing, you're done. So there we go. Now we can put our brakes on, tighten down our axle, tighten down the safety bolt there, and we can call the front done. The process for the rear is essentially the same as the front. We need to remove this brake caliper. We've also got the so now spin it the rest of the... We're gonna grab the wheel and support it. Pull the axle on through. Don't worry about the spacers falling. Slightly easier said than done, actually. Okay. Let the chain dangle, and now our wheel is free. All right, gents. As you can tell by my shirt, it's a couple of days later. There's a couple of things I'm going to do differently with this rear tire because I've had some time to stew over the suffering that was replacing the front. Technique number one that we should have done is to heat the tire up before attempting to mount it on the rim. Now, it's about 8 o'clock at night, and it's dark now, so I can't just put the tire outside like is recommended, but as an alternative, you can use a hairdryer. So I'm gonna set this on low, and I'm just gonna let it do its thing, blowing inside the tire like this, while I work on removing the old tire from the rim. So we'll go ahead and let that go. Put it on low there, let it do its thing, and I will now get on removal of the old tire. Reinstallation is simply the reverse of removal. So, take this, stick it through here. Once you get one side into the wheel bearing so that it'll at least hold the weight of the wheel up, it gets a little easier. Alright, so for some reason the bolt or the axle is now jammed in there and it's not moving either direction. So if that happens, we would find a way to drive it back out. What I would suggest doing is to get you on the opposite side a socket extension or something that you can stick in there, and a piece of wood. Let's see if you can tap on the end of the socket extension and help drive it out. Alright, so now we try it again. This is easily one of the most fiddly parts of the whole business. I've never seen, there's several different motorcycles that makes this anything other than a pain in the neck. I've seen an aftermarket solution, and now I can't remember how it worked, but there's like a bolt that goes in from the other side. It somehow made this less of a pain. Now we got it into the wheel bearing on this side. If we just... There we go. Using this socket extension may be a half-decent solution to that, actually. You may be wondering why I didn't put the chain on the sprocket. And the answer is, we still have to balance this. You can do it on the bike, as long as we get everything that touches it out of the way. Take this brake caliper. All right, so our balancing operation can be done the same way we did the front. We turn the tire, or the wheel, and let it go. And we observe where it wants to rotate to. So if we rotate it like this, you'll notice it wanted to rotate that way before. Now it wants to rotate back this way. So if we move it like there, if we rotate it there, also doesn't move. So this is probably pretty close as it is. What if we set it right there? It wants to move just a little bit that way. So if we put a couple of weights right about here, I suspect that this is our lightest spot still. So we're going to clean off a spot here with purple degreaser. Get all the oil or whatever that's on there off. Then we take our weights with the backing removed and the sticky side exposed. We put them on our wheel. And we do one on the other side. All right, so get them as close into the ridge as you can. I like to put a little piece of duct tape over them, just for fun. I don't think the duct tape actually accomplishes all that much, but who doesn't love duct tape? And if you were anal retentive about this, you could use silver duct tape on this silver wheel so it wouldn't show up, but I'm not super concerned about it. So now, if we rotate our wheel, it stays put. Now, unfortunately, we get to go through the trouble of pulling the axle back out and redoing this with the chain on it. There we go. Once you get the axle home, make sure to rotate your wheel and see that it spins freely. Sometimes these alignment plates have a little mark on them to help you line them up with the marks on the swing arm. This one doesn't, and you can put your nut back on. Now, before you tighten this down, because we've had the wheel off, we need to align it. And for that, we use our handy-dandy chain alignment tool. So there are two things that you want to check before you torque this nut down. One of which is that you've got the wheel aligned to the bike. And the way I like to do this is to assume that the forward end of the chain is rigidly attached to the bike in such a way that it's not moving around side to side. And that the wheel will be centered side to side by all the bushings that are involved in holding it in and all the bearings. So that means that you can use this alignment tool here. You want to align it with the inner links of the chain so that it aligns up with those. That looks just about right. So I think that means that we can tighten this down now, but we also want to make sure we've got about an inch of play in the lower run of the chain, which we do. And then you go get yourself a torque wrench. And tighten it to the torque spec, which for this, and then you may have to back it off just a hair, so that you can get the cotter pin in there. There we go, okay. 80 foot-pounds less just a hair, so we can get our cotter pin through there. So we remove our chain alignment tool. Optionally, and if it wasn't 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, you could clean all of the parts that you removed, including this sprocket or any of that. I don't know that it really matters all that much, but if it makes you feel better, you can clean them.
With the tires on the rims and the wheels installed back onto the bike, there's nothing left to do but take it down off the stand. The astute observer will no doubt notice that the tail section is disassembled here, which is a topic for next week. But suffice to say, I haven't been able to test ride the bike just yet, and instead, I just put it away for the night. Anyway, this was a long one, in part because this was a lot of work, but also because I did my very best to show the entire process of changing the tires, which is a totally doable job for a home mechanic, but a difficult job if you've never done it before. So, if you came here looking for help changing your tires, I hope this video helped you out. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.